There are a couple of things that are going on in the world of oil. This is such a subject, such an interesting subject, that this is all documented that there have been at least 100 years of oil wars. And the current civilization depends on oil, availability of oil, at a price which is affordable to every one of us. So America is the largest consumer of oil, not necessarily the largest importer of oil, because America itself is producing, the American output currently is higher than anyone else in the world, but its consumption is still more than that. America is right now producing about 12.8 million barrels a day, and its consumption is around 17 to 18 million barrels a day. So it is still imports, but mostly from North American countries. Canada is one of its largest suppliers. But with elections approaching, US wants prices at the next door petrol station to be an affordable level. Now, this is where Saudi Arabia comes into the picture. For Saudis to proceed ahead with their vision to 2030, they need money, and plenty of it. And that money has to come basically from oil sales. So they want the price of oil in the world markets to be as high as possible. They want to optimize their returns. I'm not saying to make it to the highest level, but they want their oil sales return to be optimized. Now, what they started to do, they started cutting production. They got involved with virtually all the OPEC member states, and to be fair, Saudi Arabia is the kingpin of Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, commonly known as the OPEC. So Saudi Arabia maneuvered it in a manner that they reduce the production so that the prices start creeping up. Now, as I mentioned, as the election year was approaching, Americans and the Biden administration wanted the prices to go down. So there was a divergence of interest at this point between Saudi Arabia and the US. Saudis wanted to optimize their returns. Americans wanted to reduce the gas prices. Then Washington started to pressurize Riyadh to open their taps. Despite calling Saudi Arabia as a pariah during his election campaign, Biden even chose to visit Saudi Arabia just to ensure that Saudi Arabia and its allies within the OPEC open their taps so that the prices go down. Now we move to the next phase, the Ukraine war. And when the Ukraine war began, reducing the inflow of petrodollars to Moscow became an strategic objective for Washington. Now for that, what could be done? That bring their prices low. Whatever they produce, the Russians produce, the flow of petrodollars to their kitty gets low and low. And for them to sustain the war in Ukraine becomes virtually impossible from a financial viewpoint. This you could compare somewhat with the Afghanistan issue, that there are many people who say that the collapse of the oil prices mid-80s was maneuvered by King Fahd and Ronald Reagan. This is a speculation. And the objective was to make the then USSR to reduce the flow of petrodollars to Moscow so that Moscow could not sustain the war in Afghanistan. The same thing they tried here. Now, now Saudi Arabia and Russia were getting together, reducing the output so that the prices go up. And the prices going up was not matching with the interests of Washington. Now, what did they do? They had a few leverages in their hand, the Americans. They did three things. The first one was that the shale output, which was beginning to go down a bit, the Biden administration ensured that the shale output within the US goes up again. So as I just mentioned at the beginning, today, the shale output, the shale oil output in the US stands at, or the US oil production today stands at somewhere around 12.8 million barrels a day. This is the highest among the oil producing nations. Saudi Arabia is producing less right now, something around 9 million barrels a day, and their maximum capacity is somewhere between 10 and 12 million barrels a day. There's debate going on whether they could really achieve 12 million barrels a day on a sustainable level or not. That's another issue. So the Saudi output could at best be somewhere between 10 to 12 million barrels a day. And they are right now producing somewhere around 9 million barrels a day, so as to make the markets a little dry and make the prices go up. Even Russians have reduced their output. So as a result of this tightening from the OPEC and its allies, the US began to increase its oil output, and it is now at 12.8 million barrels a day. Then another very interesting factor came into play, and that was Iran. The negotiations with Iran on JCPOA, the nuclear deal agreement, has been on ever since the Biden administration came into power. But that was not bearing fruits. So they literally went, and there were news all around that JCPO is not going to be revived. JCPO was signed during the Obama administration. It was signed by the Obama administration. And then when Trump got into power, they said nothing to do with it, and they got out of the JCPOA. Biden wanted to get back into JCPOA with Iran, but they wanted a deal, and Iran was not ready to concede everything what the Biden administration was asking for. So then negotiations behind the curtain, very slow, very deceit. It was not into the media galore. Those sort of discussions continued with them. And recently it was announced that they have reached some sort of agreement, not of reviving JCPOA, but at least to ensure that the temperature between the two countries get down. And as a result, what is happening? The Americans have opted to keep a blind eye on Iranian output and Iranian oil exports. Now, this was the target number one for Tehran, and they have achieved it. Right now, the Iranian output is somewhere around 3.5 million barrels a day. And their exports are somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million barrels a day. So while the OPEC Plus was not ready to open its taps, the additional flow from the US oil output and the additional flow from Iran is resulting in a balancing the demand-supply requirement of the world. And then just over the last few days, another news came in, and that was very interesting as well, that even Venezuela oil industry was sanctioned by the US. the American administration is now concluding that they have to withdraw from those sanctions so as to ensure that oil flow from the next door Venezuela also starts to creep up. So all said and done, there's a very interesting balancing game going on, where on one side, Saudi Arabia, in combination with Russia and its other OPEC colleagues, is trying to put a squeeze on their output. Americans are trying to increase their output by using all the leverages, including Iran and Venezuelan output. Now, what would the ultimate outcome of it? If the Iranian output doesn't go up, if the shale output and the US oil output doesn't go up, if the Venezuelan output stay as low as it is currently, that would mean a very tighter market. That would mean the prices of oil at the next door gas stations or petrol stations, as it is called in Pakistan, go up, creep up, and life would become difficult for ordinary consumers who goes in to fill up its car with petrol. But with this counter move by the Biden administration and the resultantly increase in output from the US, Iran, and Venezuela, the one thing could be certain, that the oil markets would not get that red hot as was initially being thought of because of the squeeze on output put by Saudi Arabia, Russia, and its other OPEC colleagues.